We're just about ready then to complete our deployment of our code to Heroku. Before we do that, we're going to need some extra libraries, and so we're going to install each of those in turn and explain what they do. The first one that we need is called white noise, and this allows us to host our static files, such as CSS and JavaScript, correctly on Heroku. So let's do pip install white noise, and after installing each library, let's freeze again and redirect to requirements.txt. Then open up our settings.py file and scroll down to middleware and add a new entry at the bottom, whitenoise.middleware.whitenoise_middleware. Be aware of the capitalization, and don't forget as well to put the comma on the end. When we've added that to our middleware, then we can scroll down in our settings.py file because we need to add an extra setting at the bottom. So go down to where our static files are being defined, and we want to add a new value called static root. So static_root equals os.path.join base_directory and static files. And this just gives a collection point for our static files. When we deploy to Heroku, it's going to collect those into that location and deploy them then to our project. What we also just want to do is make some changes to our database setting here, and this is just to keep our continuous integration testing with Travis working. We're not going to, as we said, upload our env.py file, so Travis isn't going to know what our database URL is. So let's add an if statement here that says if database URL is in our environment, then we use the URL. If it isn't, then uncomment the code that we commented out previously, cut it, and then underneath our if statement, we're going to add an else. After our else statement, we'll put a print statement in there just so that we know what's going on. And we'll say that the Postgres URL was not found. So we're going to use SQLite instead. Okay, and then under that, we can post in our old databases information. So what this will do, if the URL exists as an environment variable, we use the URL. If it doesn't, then we can use our old DB SQLite 3 database that we already have uploaded to GitHub. Now let's just make sure that our env.py file is in our .gitignore file, because we do not want those secret keys to be uploading to GitHub. We certainly don't want them to be public. And finally, we just need to create a proc file. Now you'll have done this before when deploying to Heroku. So we know Heroku needs a proc file in order to run our application. So create one with a capital P and add this line, web:/gunicorn blog.wsgi:/application. We know that this is how Heroku runs our applications. So we just need to install the Gunicorn library as well. Let's go ahead and do that. We could actually get away without installing these and just add them at the end of our requirements.txt file, but let's install them anyway and then run pip freeze again. Oops, I forgot to redirect there, and redirect to requirements.txt. So now we're just about ready to start our deployment, but we've got one more setting that we just need to change in our settings.py file, and that's very close to the top under the setting allowed hosts. And we see there that we have this array. What we need to do is add a value to that array, which is the host name of our app on Heroku. So ours is called blog-test-app. So it's blog-test-app.herokuapp.com. We need to do this, otherwise when we do deploy to Heroku, we'll get a forbidden error when we try to run it because it's not in the allowed hosts. So let's add the files, git add full stop. Let's add a commit message, added Heroku and Postgres support for deployment. And finally, let's push it up. Excellent. So the last thing that we just need to do now then is go to our app dashboard in Heroku and click on the Deploy tab. Now scroll down and click on Connect to GitHub. Now I've already connected my account to GitHub, but what will happen down here for you, if you haven't done this already, it will give you another Connect to GitHub button and ask you for your credentials and to authorize a connection. When you've done that, your GitHub username will show up here, and then we can type in the name of the repository that we want to connect. So do that, click search, and then when the correct repository comes up, click on Connect. Now we scroll down to Manual Deploy and click on Deploy Branch. Then let's watch the build log as it goes along. I'm just going to cut it a little bit because it takes some time to finish. But when that's done, we get your app was successfully deployed, and we can click on View to deploy our app. And as we see here, it's running on Heroku. Let's try adding a new post and see if that works. So we'll call it another new blog post. Yeah. Testing our newly deployed Heroku blog. And we'll give it a tag of meta again. And save it. And as we can see here, we have another new blog post. Now it's worth mentioning something at this point about the Heroku file system. Heroku has what's called an ephemeral file system. And every time the worker restarts, approximately once every 12 hours, all user-uploaded content, not what we've deployed from GitHub, but extra content is deleted. So that means that if we clicked on Choose File here and uploaded an image, then our image may only last for up to 12 hours or until the worker was restarted. To get around this, what we would usually do is store our media files on an external source, such as Amazon Web Services. Now we're going to do that in our next unit, our next module, our e-commerce app. But until then, just remember that any user-uploaded content will be deleted. Now, if your app doesn't deploy correctly, if you do get an error here, then Heroku does supply some useful logs that we can use. So if you scroll up to the top of the screen, click on the More button and View Logs, then usually you can get a very good idea here of why things aren't working. The error message can usually be very helpful to let you know why your app hasn't deployed correctly. And sometimes when the app gets more complicated, deploying to Heroku can actually be quite a complicated or difficult thing. Finally, we'll just go back to our deploy screen here and click on Enable Automatic Deploys. So whenever we update our GitHub repository, Heroku will detect that and automatically deploy our app for us. So there we go, we've covered quite a lot in our last few videos. Let's just check to see that we're still passing our continuous integration tests. So go to our GitHub repository. Way back in the first video we put this on. Let's check that the build is passing. It is. Everything is good. And that's because we remembered to make the correct adjustments for Travis while we were deploying our app. So testing as we go along is still working. So in these last few videos, we've learned how to create a simple Django blog app. We've learned how to create Postgres database support and add that to Heroku. And we've learned how to deploy our code to Heroku. As well as that, we've learned how to use white noise to host our static files if we're doing that with Heroku. And we've also learned how to connect to our GitHub repository and how to deploy our app from there. So quite a lot's been covered in these last few lessons. If you've got this far and your app is working okay, then very well done indeed.